Welcome to this year's conference on social movements organized by the GSP Group 2024. Yes, and I'd like to introduce our group. Our group is Group 2, and to do our discussion is on oil extraction in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And to do us the special honors are Wayland, Jared, Felicity, Daniel, and my good self.
So I'm going to start by giving a bit of background of the wider movement in Ecuador. So on the map there you can see these different marked national indigenous territories. There's been a long struggle for autonomy, economic, environmental and social rights for the indigenous nations in Ecuador. The oil drilling in the Amazon, which is the east side of Ecuador, where most of these territories are, is only one part of that struggle. There's a quote on the bottom from one of the spokespersons of the Waorani people. She also does articles in The Guardian and is like the founder of this NGO that's indigenous run in Ecuador called the La Ciba Alliance. This is a timeline which shows sort of the background history. The Waorani people that we're focusing on were only first contacted in the 50s by a US evangelical organization that tries to Christianize them and centralize them into one city, who actually acted as an in-between between the oil companies and sort of negotiated on their behalf and the Ecuadorian state. Drilling started in the Amazon in the late 60s and continued in the 70s, 80s and 90s by Texaco, which was later bought by Chevron. They stopped operating in the early 2000s and had lots of legal battles from the Waorani people. I think it was like mid-2000s they started trying to get reparations for the ecological damage that destroyed the rivers and destroyed lots of their territory and deforested and meant that they weren't as self-sufficient as they were before. There's this group called the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, which is the largest indigenous organization involving all the different nationalities within Ecuador. It was founded in 1986. They led a national uprising in 1990, which wasn't just against extractivism, but all the different demands they had included autonomy, economic resistance to IMF models, and more like indigenous freedoms, and also the rights to nature, and a desire for a new multinational Ecuadorian constitution, which eventually ended up happening in 2008 after a new, more left-wing government was elected. Also around that time, the Yasini ITT initiative was started in 2007 after Correa was elected, which we all heard about in one of our earlier seminars. The constitution itself gave rights to nature, like on a sort of human level, and also made the national autonomous rights more clearly demarked in Ecuador. The Ecuadorian government did a round of consultations in 2012 for the Waorani people, but also other national groups within the Yasini Park, where they said they got FPIC free prior informed consent. But the groups involved didn't even realise that's what was going on. Some of them thought it was just attendance that they were signing, so it was a very sham process. 2013, the Yasini ITT failed, but and then they started drilling. They said it failed because they didn't get enough money internationally. And then in 2015, they weren't aware yet about the consultation rounds even being what they said they were, but they started mapping, the Waorani people started mapping their territory using modern technology to have a better defense for their autonomous region and demark the territory for the other institutions to see it better. And then in 2019, they won an AMA legal victory, which is the focus that we're going to be talking about. And also, there's this wider shift on the Indigenous Confederation being more prominent after a shift in the government towards the right, which made them have a better sort of platform to organize and a need to organize. And in 2023, there was a referendum that Ecuador had where people voted against more drilling in Yasini National Park, but the government of Ecuador is still planning to continue. This is a map that the government made, I think, but I'm not entirely sure because we did a proxy, and you can see block 22 on the side here, which is the area that we're focusing on. And on the left, you can see sort of the process through it. In 2012, they did the consultations, and the mapping started in 2015, 2017, and in 2018, they realized the consultations were not what they thought they were, and they realized they needed to fight back against this supposed FPIC that the government got. They didn't. and that culminated in their legal success. And now Jed is going to talk more about the movement itself.
Thanks, Raymond. So the movement is composed of a mixture of indigenous networks, human rights and NGOs, including Amazon Frontlines. This is the Human Rights Ombudsman of Ecuador, this is Alianza CIBO, and various Waorani indigenous groups. Next slide, please. The main demands is obviously to prevent the auctioning of the ancestral lands by the government, and to set the scene, as you can see here, the rights of nature was officially codified in the Ecuadorian constitution, along with other rights, such as indigenous people's right to prior consultation and their right to self-determination. But this is at odds with the state's rights to have property rights over renewable, natural and underground resources. So the state has control of everything under the ground. Next slide, please. The Waorani people, seeing the destruction that took place with other communities due to oil extraction, started a digital mapping process with the NGO Digital Democracy and the open source application Mapeo. And this geo-referenced points of interest intrinsic to their life, such as historical landmarks, turtle nesting grounds, sacred sites, and pathways used by humans and animals. It mobilized communities through the Picanay leadership, which is the warrior leaders of the groups, to engage in the process and contribute some of the community's knowledge to the project. So, as you can see, the process was as important as the tool itself, because it mobilized communities and allowed them to work together. And this is the map. As you can see, there's about over 150 legends or symbols to codify the different phenomena, and this is it printed in 3D. This is the indigenous groups kind of being tasked to draw points of interest. This is the Ecuadorian state map of the same region. So, in that sense, it wouldn't be hard to suggest then the map resembles more the map on the right here, Buenos Aires, than the first one, because this first one is barren. But this one both shares points of interest, cultural heritage sites, and territorial peculiarities and natural routes of travel. So conceived in this way, the subsequent extractive projects that are due to be started would be the equivalent of bulldozing a city to accommodate for it. So in this sense, community mapping was central to the fulfillment of Waorani self-determination, and it demonstrated the need for a consultation process based on the Waorani's own worldview. Go to the next slide, please. Challenges, tensions, and decisions. Community voices distributed by Picanay leadership and working with Alianza CIBO. There were fears that the various communities within the Waorani community could be divided by the delimiting of territory. That's because the NAWE originally rejected the proposal as they had previously encountered map proposals by external actors for the purpose of obtaining property rights. And then there was other tensions, including tension between indigenous and Western ontologies, in that the Waorani had to adapt Eurocentric cartography conventions, such as colouring rivers blue as opposed to the brown rivers present in the community, and also working with various foreign-based NGOs such as Digital Democracy. So, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Wayland and Jed. So far we've covered quite a bit. We've covered the ongoing situation in Ecuador and how different civil society actors and the state is addressing this situation. I'd like to zoom out for a second here to talk a little bit about how the international community is perceiving the ongoing situation. So firstly, Jed has talked a little bit about the timeline, as you've seen. I know that the timeline isn't here at the moment, but we talked about how the Yusumi initiative was a failure, how there was a proposal for the international community to contribute to the preservation of the Ecuadorian rainforest to prevent the oil drilling from happening, but Jed has also illustrated with the landmark victory that there was momentum around supporting indigenous movements, and that resulted in the success of a landmark victory. The question then becomes, if we zoom out, we question what is the function of the global public sphere. Now we have indigenous rights, and we also have the intent of the Ecuadorian government in preserving the Ecuadorian rainforest, but there's also a tension there in that they have to propagate the economy. And so the question then becomes, what is the function of the public sphere in shaping and molding our minds and hearts so that we can effectively act in the public space? Political efficacy therefore refers to both the internal part, and if we can go to the next slide, we can demonstrate this a bit more. The question becomes, how can the global public sphere facilitate the following transformation? Internal political efficacy, which is how the media shapes our hearts and minds in perceiving issues, understanding tensions, and addressing tensions in public space, and therefore believing that we can enact tangible social change by our actions, thoughts, and deeds. So to bring it back to the case study that we have at hand, if we can go to the next slide. From the left to the right, I'll just go through how this has been covered in arguably the biggest public sphere, the global public sphere as seen in the media. We have major publications on the left. We've seen with Reuters addressing this, with Reuters addressing how Wall Street was urging the investors to back indigenous people. We also have an article at the bottom there with the New York Times talking about the court case in 2019 with the rhetorical hook, asking readers if they would vote to halt drilling in Ecuador, people are getting a chance. Also, as you can see in the middle of the screen, there were media mentions that were talking about the landmark victory in 2019. And then 4 years later, we see the media mentions for that specific case increase by almost 3 times. As Waylon has mentioned, this is an ongoing case. We've seen the tensions between civil society actors and also the state in wanting both of their rights and needs seen and observed. And with the Guardian article at the top right there, that article kind of captures it, with the Ecuadorian president not wanting to give up and the indigenous leader not wanting to give in. And so it leads us to the question of how we can perceive the ongoing actors in this conversation. In the following slides, as led by Felicity, we'll see how the media covers corporate actors that have a vested interest in the oil reserves in Ecuador. And it begs the question, how will these public spheres of conversation shape our perception of state and corporate actors? I'll hand it over to you, Felicity.
Thank you, Daniel. So I'll take you through how the corporate actors involved are portrayed in the global public sphere. So over the years, there have been like several of them, but at the moment, Amazonas is at the forefront. So this is like a leading state-owned oil company in Ecuador. They operate under the larger umbrella of Ecuador. It is tasked with oil exploration and its extraction in Ecuador's Amazon region. 2019 legal victory for the Waorani people, like temporarily halted their activities, but the government and Amazonas continue pushing for access. So apart from this cooperation, there are several other actors that are involved in the oil extraction, and some of them have been very famously portrayed in the global public sphere. One is the Chinese National Petroleum Corporation, CNPC, and Sinopec. So these are Chinese state-owned enterprises. They began operations in Ecuador in 2005. So Ecuador and China got very strong ties. Just in the case of like typical South-South cooperation, the government of Ecuador receives loans from the Chinese government through the Chinese banks, and usually on paper it's interest-free, but they end up paying the hard way through, they pay their loans through oil export to China. So And then we have Repsol. Repsol is a Spanish multinational company, and it has operated in Amazon region since the 1990s. And then we have Eni is Italian multinational company. Through its affiliate Agave Oil Ecuador, they began operation in Ecuador in February 2000. February 2000. And we have the infamous Chevron. Chevron is historically one of the most infamous corporate actors in Ecuador oil sector. So they no longer operate in Ecuador, but their legacies, still remains. Between 1964 and 1992, Texaco, which is now Chevron, dumped billions of gallons of toxic waste into the Amazon region, causing widespread contamination and deforestation. So, one example is the Amazon Chernobyl, which remains one of the most notorious environmental crimes globally. So, that's even an ongoing battle. The indigenous groups continue to fight for compensation, but Chevron has avoided paying compensation and damages through prolonged litigation. But last point, sadly, these corporations sort of they have the backing of the government of Ecuador, and this makes it as a government they are tasked with the responsibility to protect the indigenous people and the environment. At the same time, they are the sole benefactor of the revenue of the oil. So it begs the question. And sort of think about how they will have a dilemma where their interests or loyalty should lie. And I was asked, as I was researching about it, the question of how do the state's corporate relationships in resource extraction complicate social movement efforts to achieve justice. So it's something for us to ponder about.
Yes, since we are against time has beaten us, we can just put the conclusion. I don't know if we can give us just 1 minute to just do the conclusion. So thank you, fellow presenters, for that insightful presentation. So to classify it into 3 groups, we have the what were they fighting for the Waorani people? Protection of their ancestral lands, environmental preservation, recognition of indigenous rights, autonomy over their own lands. And what more medium did they use? They use strategic use of media and technology, and especially the use of drone, environmental stewardship, and forest conservation, and climate change advocacy. And then also use community-led, that is ownership, leadership, collectively, and then consensus building was also one of the key points. And then the use of legal system, in collaboration with both national and international experts. And then what did they achieve? They achieved this by the victory that they won in 2019, which became the model of advocacy in the rest of the Latin America region, especially for the indigenous rights. And then they will be able to reclaim about 500,000 acres of their land. And then the global awareness of the plight of the Waorani people. And that is what we are currently doing. As you can see, we are also adding our voice to the Waorani people. That's why we are recording this and also publicize it to the world to also see what happened to them. Thank you.
We have comments, questions? Nobody wants to comment, I think.